What I am going to cover today, in today's Training Tuesday, we are going to review clever playlists. It was our first topic a few months ago when we started. We've had some new participants join, and it was a topic that we weren't able to capture a recording of before because of some AI note-taking agents that had joined and started their own recordings. So it is a great topic to revisit. It is a powerful concept in Korbyt, so it is worth some additional time, make sure everyone's comfortable with. So that is going to be our topic for today. We're going to talk about clever playlists for scheduling content. This ties in with some of the concepts we reviewed previously, recently, about building your own custom templates, adding tags to those templates as a way to automate content to a screen, and then those when conditions to make sure it only shows up exactly when and where you want it to. So that will be our topic today. So I hope everyone is okay with that topic switch. So without further ado, we'll dive in. And we'll talk about clever playlist options in your Korbyt system. Let me transition over to my CMS. So here we are in my Korbyt tenant. Again, if you're just joining us and this is the first time you are seeing our new modern UI with the navigation bar on the side, this is an option that can be turned on in your tenant. It was one of our Training Tuesday topics. So if you are interested in switching your tenant to this view of the menu, you can contact support@korbyt.com and they can turn on this option for your system. So we are going to be starting in the playlist area. So I do want to share kind of before we dive in with playlists, I do have some pieces already configured in my media manager. I have some folders and some content that I want to schedule. So we can see those pieces happening. So we are going to head into the schedule section and to playlists. So clever playlists, you get that choice when you first drop down this menu. You can choose a standard playlist or a clever playlist. Once you make your choice here, you can't change this choice. So clever playlists are the option that we really do encourage you to use whenever possible. That does mean there are times where it is not possible. So I do want to point those out. Clever playlists were a piece of Korbyt that got added when we moved to our more modern Korbyt with our Korbyt 2.0. That was really the naming convention. That's where the mega menu came in. Before that, there was a blue sidebar that was very detailed and kind of hard to navigate. So the Korbyt system for the players has to at least be up to 2.0 or newer for the instructions that they are able to run. You're able to see your player's version on the player's screen. If we look at it in a list view, you can see the agent version for your players there. So if you have players that are below 2.0, you will need to use the more standard playlists for those devices. But other than that scenario, clever playlists can be your choice, and we do encourage them to be your choice. Now, just because it's a clever playlist, it doesn't mean it has to be complex. That's the first kind of myth I want to quash when it comes to clever playlists, that they have to have all of this automation tied to them. They don't. You can start with a clever playlist that is just manually selected items. So if I go and I pick the items that I want to show on the screen manually, that could be the end of my clever playlist if I wanted it to be. I can then, treat it like a standard playlist, move the order, control the view times for items in seconds. What makes a clever playlist clever, though, is this rocket ship icon that you see. So instead of manually picking items, I can open up that clever instruction set and write a set of instructions that tell the playlist how to find the content that I want it to play. So as the content that matches these criteria gets added into the system, it will automatically become part of the playlist. I don't have to do anything further actually editing the playlist if the items I'm adding already match some criteria. So the criteria can be based around a few different factors. One, right at the top, the first choice where it starts when it's opened is tags. So again, tags you can add to media items, images and videos as you import them into Korbyt. They can also be added to layout designs. They can be added into template designs so that every time the template gets used, that tag is automatically attached. Can also be tied to media manager folders. So I can have a specific folder. I want to pull in Albany messages, for example. So whatever's in that folder, well, what happens with things in that folder? Well, I want to show the items in that folder for a number of seconds. Let's go 20 seconds each. How many of the items do I want to play? The default is all, but I can actually set a limit there. Maybe there's going to be hundreds of items in that Albany folder. And every time the playlist goes through, I want it to pick 3 items at random. So it would take a full minute, but it would play 3 random items when this item pops up in the playlist. Or I can leave it as all the items. Can tell it to play in an order that is the file name, A to Z. Maybe I have messages that are in that folder that I want to play in a specific order. So I can have users just name their files like 001, 002, 003, and then they will know that it will play in that certain order if I configure my playlist to a setting like this. I'm going to call this local Albany messages. So now I've added that. You can see I get preview items here in the playlist if there are items that match the criteria. Right now, those are the items in that Albany folder. As more items get into Korbyt, you'd see into that folder, you'd see more little thumbnails. It only ever goes up to 9. That's how many can fit in that space. But this clever rule will play whatever I configure it to play. Right now, it's set to all. And you can have multiple of these rules in a clever playlist. It's one of the things that makes them clever. So I can have another folder-based rule for another location. So for Charlotte, I'm going to tell it 20 seconds each, play all. I can even give it different instructions if I wanted to. And I do have a third folder in my system. So I'll go ahead and grab that just for completeness, giving it the same rules each time. The name that you give the instructions here at the top is the name that will show in the playlist in terms of items, but it doesn't actually set any of the rules. So calling this Daytona local content doesn't actually set where it will play or what items. If I click my lightning bolt, it reopens the rule and I can see how it was configured. So the names are just that. They're meant to be helpful, but they don't have to exactly match every instruction inside the clever playlist. So I have these items now, these automations. So from a end user perspective, managing my end users, local users, if I have users in Korbyt that I only want to affect the Albany messages, name my playlist real quick. I can give those users access to just that folder in the media manager. So they're then able to add items into this folder that will automatically flow onto that playlist. Or by adding the right tag, they can then flow onto that playlist. So that's how Clever Playlists can be used to add content to a playlist automatically. Now, there's another step I need to do for this example. Here, I have items that I don't necessarily want to play in every location across my system. I have Albany local, Charlotte local, and Daytona local. So I need to provide some instruction inside of this Clever rule that tells it when it should play. You get to see those instructions by clicking where it says content. When I click on content, it opens up when options. So now I can actually put limits on the content. The content's coming from that folder, but when should it be seen out on the screens? And you can base that off things like the player metadata. Metadata are all of those biographical pieces of information that you can assign to the player. So I can use the city, for example, and say, well, I want the Albany content to play when the metadata for the player's city is Albany. Add. So now these items will only play on media players that have been told their city is Albany. And I could repeat that for Charlotte and Daytona as well. Now, there are those situations where the city for the actual mailing address doesn't necessarily match the casual name that your organization might have for that location. Albany is honestly a great example. Albany is a city made up of a lot of other cities, but it all just gets called Albany. So I can use things like the other player metadata fields. We talked about these in a previous Training Tuesday topic. I can use something like the custom metadata field, call this location name, and then I could reference that back to my playlist. I could even use things like abbreviations, like if the location is ALB, it will show ALB content. I just have to make sure that my rules match. So if I was using something like metadata 01, instead of city, I would use metadata 01, and I would be looking for the value ALB. So now things coming from the Albany folder will play in the players that have been told in metadata 01 they are Albany. I can repeat that process for my other players. Charlotte usually gets abbreviated CLT. So maybe that for your organization includes places like Matthews, which is right outside of Charlotte. Those metadata fields, again, just a quick reminder, you can set what those are called in your system. So if I wanted that to actually be called like location abbreviation, I'm renaming what that field gets called in a friendly way. So now that makes it a little bit easier if you are using those drop downs to see that as the name instead of metadata 01. So now I could send this playlist to every player in my organization. This item would play everywhere. I've put no limits on it. This item will play everywhere. I've put no limits. This item will play everywhere. These items will only show up on screens that have been told in that metadata 01 field that it's ALB, CLT, DAB. So it'll look for things that match. One of the limits of this approach is your ability to preview this content. So I can send this out to all the players on my network, and they'll play locally. But if I preview my playlist here, I can put like my Albany messages first, and I go to preview it, you'll notice it skips all my Albany pictures. Because my web browser is not a media player that has been told in its metadata 01 field that it is ALB. So it's going to skip all those local pieces. Now, how you could preview it is if you go to the players and you have a player that matches certain characteristics, it will fill in those details when you preview from the player level in terms of all of those metadata fields. So we are seeing Albany images on a preview of a player that we've told is ALB, but it won't show me the previews for those others locations. I'd have to go to a player that has those details to see that. So Clever Playlists can allow a lot of automation through the system, and we're not even done showing you all the ways it can automate, but there are some limits that come by placing limits on content. In terms of those limits, I do want to show you some other examples there. So I'm just going to grab, no, I haven't loaded any videos yet. I'll just grab a layout real quick. I have an individual layout that I've added by hand. No clever rule. But I actually only want this to play in certain situations as well. In this Clever Playlist, I have that ability to click the lightning bolt on this individual item, and it opens up the when conditions directly. It doesn't give me the content selection options because I've already selected the content. I picked this piece of content. But I don't have to let it play always. Maybe I only want it to play when the metadata is a certain value on the player, or certain dates, date ranges, or days of the week. Maybe I only want this item to show up on Saturdays and Sundays. Or maybe I only want it to play at certain times of a day. So I want it to play between the hours of 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. And I could set limits on all my other items that they only play between the hours of 6 a.m. and 10 a.m. so that the other items stop playing. This one becomes the only item that's valid on the playlist, and it's the only item that plays overnight. I could accomplish all of this inside of one playlist if I wanted to, if it's a clever playlist. There's one more piece to this automation I want to share with you. And it might be a way, if you have lots of locations, it might be a way for you to simplify this automation out to certain screens. So you see, for my 3 locations, I had to write 3 different rules. Let me get these all down here together. You can see them together. So I had to create a Charlotte rule, a Daytona rule, and an Albany rule. You can imagine that becomes a bit cumbersome if you have hundreds of locations. So there is another way to tie the content to a screen without having to write several rules. Now, this approach uses tags. With tags, you have the ability not just to write in a tag, but to reference the player's metadata in as the value. So I'm going to create a rule. I'm going to call it locally tagged content. I'm going to say the tag is, and instead of writing in a value here like ALB or DAB, or CLT, I'm going to tell the system what I want it to use is the value that it will find on the player in the meta 01 field. That field that we renamed location abbreviation. You notice I didn't type in location abbreviation here. That friendly renaming in your settings, just so you know, it is just a friendly rename. At the deepest levels of the system, that field is still just known as meta 01. So if you're going to use this type of tagging referencing, you do have to be familiar with what metadata field you're using if they've been renamed. But now I don't have to put any when conditions on this instruction, because how this will work is when the media player gets this playlist, says, hey, you're getting assigned to this playlist, we need to find the items that match your meta 01 value. That is how it will know which items it should play through the system. Now, this is a big upside. Instead of having to write lots of rules for each individual location, I can write one instruction. Downsides. Everything is a balance. What works best? One of the downsides is you will not see any of the items here in the playlist. That is because there's no actual defined value here at the playlist level. Because I haven't told it, find me things that are ALB or DAB or CLT. I've told it, when you get down to the player, use what you find there to go back into the media manager and the layouts and pull in items that match. So the playlist level doesn't preview anything for me. So that is one downside of this approach. I'll let you know that the other downside, potential downside, is that it uses tags. So while I mentioned that if I want to limit, hey, only Albany users get to put content into the Albany folder, that works with folders, but it does not work with tags. So any user in the system would be able to add a tag for a location and automate content to that location. So if I'm here in Charlotte and I tag this ALB, it will start playing in Albany because I have used the wrong tag. There are tools in the system that we can enable that can limit what tags people enter, but it's still a system-wide setting. So there is a tag administration option that you can turn on so that people can't just type a tag. So you don't have to worry about typos. Instead of typing in the tags, they would select them from a drop-down, but it still wouldn't stop them from selecting the wrong tag. And then it would play in the wrong location. So that is one of the other limits with the tag-based rules. There are ways to control it if you use other flows of media into Korbyt. For example, instead of having users log in directly to Korbyt to import their media, if you were using our couriers, for example, to import into the media manager, and you have a OneDrive folder that you've shared with people, they drop items into that OneDrive folder, and it gets a specific tag value assigned through the courier. So you could have an Albany folder that you share with Albany people through OneDrive. They drop it in that folder. The couriers copy it into Korbyt and put the Albany tag on for you. That can also be accomplished through our SharePoint integrations. That is more of an actual data integration than a courier, so it's a little more complex, but is a way to control what gets tagged, what values. The other way that you can control that is if you were to create a predefined template for Albany that has that tag on it, Then when people use that predefined web form that you've given them access to, it will be automatically tagged Albany for them. So it wouldn't be using a folder and an import into the media manager. This could be, Albany local full screen. I add one image element to it. Don't even have to necessarily put a placeholder. Image templated, let them upload a new file. I've now created a template, if you think back to our template training, that people could use either as a launchpad or a predefined web form where they can add their one image. It just goes full screen. When it comes into Korbyt as a new layout, it gets tagged as ALB. It plays in the location I want it to play automatically. So just some ways that clever playlists can be tied with some of the other features we've reviewed. Clever playlists, a lot they can do. Let me ask, what questions can I answer for you about clever playlists? Any questions about clever playlists? You can feel free to type into the chat or come off mute if you have any questions. Okay. If no questions, I'll thank you for joining. Thank you for following along in today's training. I look forward to seeing you in future Training Tuesday sessions.